Hello, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's virtual program series. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the National Archives Foundation. We are the nonprofit partner to the National Archives. Through this foundation programming, we are pleased to open the virtual doors of the National Archives and its more than 15 billion records, objects, films, letters, drawings, holdings of all types, and most importantly, the stories of our nation's past. The National Archives Museum in DC is bustling this summer. We've had an amazing July 4th weekend a few weeks ago, packed crowds, and of course, visitation has been great. If you can't visit us in Washington, you can always check us out at archivesfoundation.org to catch up on the latest from the museum, or follow us on social. In fact, right now, you can click that follow button on YouTube and subscribe to help grow our network. And if you can't join us in Washington, you're from far off, and I see there's lots of folks who are watching from all across the country. That's great. You can follow the public programs and education outreach on the National Archives YouTube channel. There's plenty of ways to be connected to the archives. On today's program, we have a live event. We have a special guest who will be taking your questions later. Please use the YouTube chat box. And as some of our old friends know, I'd love to see your hometown and state, so drop it in there now and I'll give you a shout out later on. Today, my guest is Dr. Colleen Shogan. She's the 11th Archivist of the United States. She assumed the position just a few weeks ago, May 17th, following her Senate confirmation. As you may have noticed in her pre-program slide, she's been busy in her first couple of months. She comes to the National Archives from the White House Historical Association, where she served as the Senior Vice President and Director of the David M. Rubenstein Center. Before that, she worked for a number of years at senior positions at the Library of Congress and the US Senate. She's an author and political scientist with a PhD from Yale, and she hails from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We might get to that at the end. Dr. Shogan, welcome.
Hello, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
It has been a whirlwind. Hope you saw a few of those pictures from some of your trips and some of your events here in the DC area. Have you caught your breath yet?
No, and I don't think I will for quite a while. We're going to be moving forward really at a breakneck pace here for the next couple of months, because I want to visit as many National Archives facilities, locations, and staff as possible.
Great. That's a great way to get to know the agency for sure. Well, as I said in my brief introduction, you've served in a couple of government roles before. What is it that drew you to government service?
Well, I had an interesting path to government service. I was hired as an assistant professor at George Mason University to teach political science and American politics. And I moved here after graduate school. And quite frankly, I thought that I might teach at George Mason for the rest of my career. But I decided to pursue a fellowship with the American Political Science Association. It's one of their oldest fellowships, their congressional fellowship program, so that I could take a year off and work in Congress, because I had moved through my education pretty quickly and I had never really taken time to do really even an internship in Congress or the White House. And then I was working and teaching here in the Washington, D.C. area at George Mason. And a lot of my students, both graduate students and undergraduate students, had real-time Washington experience, either as interns or as full-time positions. And I felt like that part of my background was missing. And one way I could do that was by pursuing the fellowship and working in Congress for 9 months. And so I did that, and I received the fellowship, and I went to work on Capitol Hill in the Senate. And I just fell in love with it. There was a whole other world that opened up to me, which was different than teaching and researching in academia. And when I was presented with the opportunity to remain in my Senate office after my fellowship was over for a full-time position, it took me about a day to decide that this was what I wanted to do. And I really, never looked back after that, although I continued to teach. Actually on a yearly basis with George Mason a little bit, but predominantly with Georgetown University after that.
Okay. And I didn't hear you say, it's been a lifelong vision to be the Archivist of the United States. So, folks do wonder, even when I go around the country and I meet folks, and they're like, Archivist of the United States. And I'm like, yeah, we call it AOTUS, like POTUS, SCOTUS, we have our DC things. How does one become the archivist? I mean, did President Biden or someone from the White House just call you one day? Are there headhunters for this? Give people a little bit of the background.
Well, no, President Biden didn't call me, but you do get a email from the White House if you were on their radar for a position like this, for a nomination. And, they were looking for someone that had a fair amount of government experience, that had some knowledge, preferably of Congress and how it operated, but then also knew a good deal about history, but also knew cultural institutions, knew what it was like to work in a cultural institution. And of course, I'd had over a decade at the Library of Congress, and including many years at the Congressional Research Service. So I kind of fit a profile that they were looking at in the Presidential Personnel Office in the White House, and that's really where you interface predominantly in the beginning months. But it does take some time, and there's a lot of background references and checks and an inordinate amount of paperwork that you have to fill out. And I'm not kidding you, paperwork that took me, I think, about 3 days over a weekend, really just, working 7-8 hours a day, just having to gather the information to be able to fill out the required paperwork when they really are serious for you as a potential nominee. And once you move through that process, you think, oh, well, I've probably made it, but you really haven't, because then you get handed off to another set of lawyers who go through an entire ethics process with you, which is a different set of paperwork, different than the other paperwork that you did previously. But then eventually, you find out that you are probably either the preferred nominee, or there's just one or two people that are being considered, usually when they're starting to like fingerprint you at the FBI and things like that. Really one day I got an email saying that I was the candidate, and they just needed to talk to the president. I was the preferred nominee, but they had to talk to the president about it before they could actually solidify it. And then a few days later, I got a phone call from the White House saying that they had talked to the president that morning and that I was going to be the nominee. But the funny part is they tell you can't say anything to anyone. They've just told you something that's going to change your life, but you can't say anything to anyone. You can tell, your spouse or your significant other or some, very, very close family members. But you really can't tell anybody else, no friends, nobody outside of like a very tight inner circle. So I was able to tell my husband, and I was able to tell my brother, but that was really it. And you just have to wait for the president to be able to make that public announcement, which for me, I think was about close to 2 weeks later. So you really had to keep quiet for a good period of time before that announcement comes forward.
Maybe that's part of the test. So that takes us to the next stage, which is a Senate confirmation process, which gets a lot of coverage in the news. I don't know, you and I were talking, someone mentioned to you, it's like having a root canal at the foundation. We're fortunate we have a number of board members who have been through that process. It seems to have gotten more grueling. I assume. I've never been through it, but to talk folks through that, because I think one of the things people don't understand is you actually go and meet with the senators ahead of time before there's sort of the public grilling, if you will.
That's right. There's more paperwork for that, which is separate from the nomination paperwork, just to be clear. So you have to fulfill those requirements. But then, I relied upon some of the senior staff at the National Archives, which immediately started to prepare me for the nomination process. They sent me files and files that they had been compiling about various programs and entities within the National Archives that they wanted me to know about that could come up during the confirmation process. And I just put all those files on a thumb drive, and I just went to, my local Kinko's or Office Depot and just, printed them all out, paper punched them, and created my own 3-ring binder, because I thought it would be easier for me to be able to go through and read it that way and then mark it up where I had questions. So I very quickly started to go into that process, which was hundreds and hundreds of pages of briefing materials they had prepared for me. But then eventually you start to, they're going to move forward. You have to do a nomination hearing. And so you do have a White House Office of Congressional Affairs. You are assigned to a person that assists you with the process. And the name of my liaison was Jim, and Jim was really with me the entire nomination process. And he assisted with making appointments with senators on the committee, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, that would be handling my nomination. And not every senator, unfortunately, takes you up on the offer to meet. We really wanted to meet with as many senators as possible so I could explain a little bit about my background and what I was planning, what my goals were if I was confirmed to serve as Archivist of the United States. We certainly met with as many as possible. And then the next step is that you will have a nomination hearing. In my case, the nomination timed out because at the end of every Congress, every 2-year Congress, then you have to renominate if you don't have a final Senate floor vote. And so my nomination timed out, so I had to be renominated again, which I was very quickly, actually, on the first day that President Biden was able to renominate people for positions requiring Senate confirmation. He renominated me, and the entire process started again, except my paperwork had already been processed. So it was a little easier that time. Once again, offered to meet with senators, have another confirmation hearing. And at that point in time, my nomination was approved out of committee. And then I think about a little bit less than 2 months later, I finally saw my Senate floor votes.
Some might say twice as nice, right? That's go around.
There is something to be said. I will say I would have loved to have been confirmed earlier, obviously, because I would have been able to start the position earlier, and that would have been the preferred course. However, I did have a lot of time in between, even the downtime, quite frankly, between the one nomination finishing up and then being renominated for the next nomination, because the Senate doesn't do anything usually the end of December and into January. So that was just really time in which the nomination was sitting there and there wasn't a lot of forward movement. So I was able to continue to read more about the National Archives. Once again, senior staff continued to provide me with more information. I created another 3-ring binder. So I had the original one, then I started a new one, and had even more. I was really well prepared. In other words, when I came on board in May, because I had more time to learn about the National Archives and learn about the various programs and the various divisions within the National Archives. So in that sense, I made good use of the time, and so it was okay.
Well, I know when you first arrived in the building, you said you were going to do some listening. You know, obviously, you've met a lot of staff. You're learning the department roles, budget strains. It's only been a couple of months. Has it been an affirmation of some of that material you saw ahead of time? Has it been a big learning curve? Obviously, you're still on that curve, but I think folks, and you visited a few places. So I don't know if you want to sort of wrap that answer all together, what you're starting to see as you move around the country.
Right. I mean, it is an affirmation of what I had learned during the nomination and confirmation process. There was not, in some ways, there wasn't big surprises waiting for me on the other side, because once again, I felt like I was very prepared to assume the role and knew a lot about various challenges that were being presented. I've been on 3 trips so far. You showed pictures of them. I went, my first trip was to St. Louis, to the National Personnel Record Center, the NPRC in St. Louis, and also in Valmeyer, Illinois. The military records are, of course, stored in St. Louis. And I was really impressed by the volume of military records. I mean, I think there's about 48 million military records in the archives custody through NPRC. I think that's about right. And to go into the storage facilities where those military records are held is absolutely, it's really surprising. And I had been to a lot of storage facilities because I had been to all of the Library of Congress where they hold all of the collections. I had seen all those storage facilities in Maryland, and I had toured them and understood the various facilities that have been built for the Library of Congress. So it wasn't something that I'd never seen before in my life. But really, with the National Archives, it is much, much more material. Even that physical, those physical records that are being held, absolutely enormous. Warehouses just stacked, you see that one picture that you showed where I was on the ladder that I climbed the whole way up. Obviously, that's very, very high on that ladder, but there's a catwalk on top of that, right? There's a catwalk, and there's a whole other level of the same thing above where we were, in that picture. So it's like double that amount of the height of the records that are stacked, and then just as far back as the eye can possibly see, as far as the length of the facility. So that was really impressive to me to understand the enormity of what we're talking about when we talk about the records of the United States.
Well, and I joke with friends give me a hard time. It's like Raiders into the Raiders Lost Ark. I'm like, well, sort of, except they're all little gray boxes. That it's massive. These facilities are very impressive. So, well, you're also a trailblazer. You're the first woman to hold this position. How does it feel to be the first woman archivist? Do you feel additional pressures? Are there any decisions your predecessors have made that you're now can finally say, okay, I'm gonna make these changes? That's been, I know, made that's a headline for the archives, and as folks are covering your arrival.
Right, it is, and it should be. The world of people like to call it the glam world, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Is, I think, predominantly numerically more women than men, in that world that work in the glam world and glam related fields. And even in academia, in the history profession, there's probably more women who are in history than in many other disciplines within academia. But oftentimes you see men who lead, museums, lead libraries, lead archives. And that's a phenomenon that we see typically throughout the United States in a lot of female-dominated professions. Even though there's a lot of women in the profession, then when it comes to the people who actually lead the organizations or the agencies, oftentimes it will be men. And this is a good cycle, I think, to change and to break. And so I'm very happy to be able to do that. There were a lot of really accomplished and energetic women who work at the National Archives. There's been several acting archivists who have served, who have been women, including Deb Wall, who was previous to me, who did a terrific job. So there's a real legacy of that type of leadership, and I'm happy that I'm able to continue it.
Great. Well, let's jump in. While we were waiting for a new archivist to come on, the archives spent a little time in the media for a number of reasons. So love to touch on a few of those things. I think I'm seeing some questions coming in, so we'll see if we can bat a few of them out of the way. So obviously the Presidential Records Act, there's been a lot of headlines about that. I know you're not going to necessarily get into some of the details for legal reasons, but the Presidential Records Act, the Federal Records Act, why should the American public be concerned about where the records go? Why should they be at the archives? Interested in your take on that.
Sure. Well, first, it is the law of the United States in the Presidential Records Act, which only applies to presidential records, and then the Federal Records Act applying to other records that are not presidentially created, not anything to do with the White House. So it is certainly the law. That's the first part of the answer. But really, beyond that, the records are shared history in the United States, and rightfully, they are the property of the American people. The National Archives is the custodian of those records, and we take that role very seriously. But the role of the archives is to preserve and protect those records and then share them with as many Americans as possible. Without having records, without having the ability to be able to evaluate the decisions that have been made by our elected officials, by those who work in the federal government, you're really missing a key ingredient or element of democracy, which is accountability. And so it's very, very important that the records of the United States, both federal records and presidential records, do remain available to the American people so they can learn from them and understand our shared history. It's a very important element to democracy. And without that, you're not able to really make the evaluative decisions you need to make as someone engaged in a democracy, as a voter or as a citizen. So I take that very, very seriously. I think that the vast majority of Americans agree with that prospect and want to make sure that these records are available to them and also available to the generations yet to come.
So similarly, there's been some confusion over the same sort of period around the role, and some people don't know. I think there's some people that absolutely know that the archives has a role in the amendment process. Can you talk about the sausage making there, the role of the archives?
Sure. The archivist has the role of certifying and then publishing in the Federal Register an amendment once it's satisfied all the requirements from the Constitution to become an amendment. So it is what is viewed as an administrative role to be able to do that. And the archivist does not decide what amendment is in the Constitution. The archivist recognize when those criteria have been fulfilled, then is the certification and the publication of the amendment. And that's the role that the archivist plays.
And so it doesn't really matter the topic or the issue. It's more about the meeting the criteria.
It doesn't have anything to do with the topic of the amendment. It has to do with everything to do with process. There is no room for the archivist to substitute his or her judgment into, whether or not you like an amendment or don't like an amendment, or any substantive role in the amending process. It is, once again, some people would call it a ministerial function. That's the legal term. I would just call it an administrative function.
Mm-hmm. And I want to remind folks we'll be taking questions in a few minutes. I've got a few more of my own still stacked up, but feel free to don't wait until the Q&A. You can put your questions in now if you'd like to do that. You did mention the military records, and I didn't want to jump in at that point, but that's another area. I know during COVID, the archives struggled to keep up with the demand, and there's been a great effort, Herculean effort, I think, to catch up on that. Do you want to just touch on that?
It's really amazing. During COVID, unfortunately, due to requirements of social distancing and the requirements to comply with public health measures, there weren't a number of people. There were some people that could be on site at NPRC, but not the full staff could be on site at NPRC to be able to process the requests for veterans records that were coming in. They did attend to the most urgent veterans requests, for example, for things such as requests for burials at military cemeteries, but they weren't able to keep pace with that real onslaught of requests for veterans records that occurs on a daily basis. So at around the end of the pandemic, the backlog was about 600,000 requests, which is a lot. It's a very daunting number, but due to the leadership at NPRC and at the National Archives, came up with a plan about how to tackle the backlog. Also working with the Veterans Administration, their help and assistance. And I'm happy to report that the backlog now is at about 260,000 requests, I think is about the last number that I saw. Maybe somewhere a little bit less than 260,000. And I keep an eye on the number every week. And we are still on track, I'm happy to say, to clear that backlog by the end of the calendar year. So hopefully by sometime in December of this year, we will have cleared that backlog completely. And we'll be back to business as usual. But the people who work at NPRC have been extraordinarily diligent. They have been working overtime, as you might imagine. That facility basically works 24 hours a day at this point, with people working additional rotations throughout the day, and then also on the weekends and even on federal holidays when available. So that is the way they've been able to draw down that backlog. And once again, hopefully we do see the light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully that backlog will be cleared very soon.
Well, let's change gears. You've come on an interesting time, because around the corner, there's kind of a big celebration coming in 2026, the 250th of the Declaration of Independence and our founding. Can you share, I know you're still getting up to speed on everything, some of the details of what the Archives has planned? Obviously, the foundation is collaborating on that for the upcoming 250th.
Well, one of the big changes is, of course, and we have the foundation support in this, and also congressional support, is to be renovating and improving the Public Vaults exhibit, which is the area behind the founding documents. So behind the rotunda, which is the main exhibit at the National Archives, in addition to the rotunda displaying the founding documents. And those exhibits just went under renovation on July 5th, started the renovation on July 5th, and they will be available in 2025. And I think that will be a really major development at the National Archives. The exhibits will feature records, obviously, from the collection that people will be able to see up close, but they will also feature digital interactives. So you'll be able to zoom in and look at a document really close, and be able to see the details that you might not be able to see if you were just hunched over looking inside a case. And you'll be able to curate your visit. And if there are certain aspects of American history that interest you, you'll be able to see more records that are around that particular topic or subject area. So I think that's going to be great for all visitors at the National Archives, particularly for our younger people, for kids, K through 12, which we are really going to target as we head into 2026. With our civics initiative, which is another part of the 2026 work that we are kicking off, which is, we have problems in this country concerning civics. I don't think too many people will disagree with that. There was recently test scores that were released, I would say about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and the test scores were not great in the areas of American history and civics. So we really have to try to supplement what kids are being taught in school, and also provide teachers with the best possible teaching tools really that we can, so we can reinvigorate the topic of American government, civics, how does our government work, but also American history. And we have done this at the National Archives. There's been a long tradition of working in the field of education, but it's something I feel very passionate about, being a political scientist, someone who has studied American national government for her entire career. So we are going to figure out ways in which we can double down on this initiative heading into 2026.
And that's obviously the foundation is the board is very committed to this financially and with our own resources. In fact, it goes back to our history. You might not even know the story, but when we first were founded over 30 years ago, one of the first major initiatives that the foundation undertook was to send binders, physical binders of curriculum to teachers around the country so they would use primary sources. So what's old is new, what's past is prologue. And so here we are trying to find the new ways to engage the next generation in both primary sources, the founding documents, and and our government and democracy. Well, let me, I should wrap up my portion here because I know there's a lot of questions rolling in. So again, encouraging folks to put your questions in the chat box. I do want to give some shout outs. We've got a great audience here today. I think at one point we've got over 400 folks right now, but
Great.
Birmingham, Alabama, Florida, Illinois, Fairbanks and Homer, Alaska, Boise, Idaho, Denver, Tennessee, Brooklyn's in the house. Let's see, Virginia, California, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Pennsylvania, folks all over the DMV here, Detroit, Michigan, Oklahoma, Puerto Rico, Maine, Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, and then a number of organizations, some of our partner organizations in the archives, library, and museum world are watching as well. So welcome. We're glad to have you. It's been a minute since the foundation has done a virtual program. So this is an exciting one to bring on. So let me see what the questions are here that are piling up here. Let's get here's a good one to start things off. Have you ever done your own genealogy research?
That's a good question. Not too much. However, during the pandemic, I was able to trace back some of my mother's ancestors actually using grave markers. There's a great website which uses grave markers as a way to be able to do that. And I was surprised to learn using that resource that my mother's family traces back to the Revolutionary War and in that time frame, because I wasn't really aware of that. I wasn't sure my research was exactly right, but I was able to look and acquire research that my mother's brother had done from a professional genealogist, my uncle, and his actual research that he had commissioned matched up with what I had discovered online using those grave markers pretty well. So I think that it's actually I probably have the right lineage there. I was able to, when I was a nominee, I did look at the 1950 census, which of course was available online from the National Archives because they were able to scan the documents and also use machine learning. And I was able to find both my parents in the 1950s census, which was really terrific. It took me about a little bit longer to find my mom because her name was Joy Smith. And so that was a little bit harder to find her. But it took maybe 5 minutes to find my dad. I very easily was able to find him, but I was able to locate both of them. And that was a lot of fun.
Excellent. I did the same extra the day it came out. It took me maybe about 10 minutes to find my grandparents and my mom, who was a child at the time in that household, and the last name was spelled a little bit. Well, I guess the reader spelled it a little bit to change the letter. So it's great to explore. So it's good to know about that. So we have a number of different questions I'm trying to keep track of on presidential libraries. I know you've started to make some visits. I don't know if you would talk about a couple that you've had two interesting, almost extremes of experiences of different administrations you've visited so far. Maybe talk about that. And one of the questions was, I guess they've heard you saying that you hope to revitalize the presidential libraries. I don't know if you want to talk about some vision about the libraries.
Sure. I was able to visit the LBJ Presidential Library. That was part of the National Archives Foundation was hosting a meeting there and a dinner. So I was able to do that and also meet with the staff of the LBJ Library. And then I just came back from a trip visiting with the staff of President Obama's presidential library, which will be the first digital presidential library. So, and also the Obama Foundation, which is building the Obama Presidential Center, will not be a NARA facility, but we will be engaging in a lot of collaboration back and forth with the Obama Foundation at the Obama Presidential Center. And I'm happy to report that those discussions went very well. And I'm very enthusiastic about that collaboration, which will take place between our NARA Presidential Library staff for President Obama and the Presidential Center staff run run by the foundation. Yes, I'm very excited about that. I mean, presidential libraries are one of our main gateways into the United States, into the states, with visitors coming into our presidential libraries, once again, post-COVID, to be able to visit the museums and also visit the research rooms. And as I was telling the Obama Foundation and our presidential library staff members in Chicago last week, presidential history, we know, and historians know this, presidential history isn't the only American history, right? There's other ways to study American history. There's other components of American history, but many Americans will use presidential history as the lens to understand about American history. So our presidential libraries and our presidential museums all across the country are incredibly important. They tell the story of that particular president, of that particular White House, of the first family. And that's vital, but it also tells a little bit more about that time period in American history and what were some of the challenges that president and that administration faced. So for example, if you go to the Carter Library, you're going to learn something about the late 1970s and what were some of the challenges that President Carter faced. You'll definitely learn something about Jimmy Carter, but it's even bigger than Jimmy Carter, and so on and so forth. The same for LBJ and all of our presidential library museums and our archives. So we're planning to do that in a new way, particularly with the advent of the digital library with President Obama. And it's going to be a new era for us. And I'm very, very excited about it. We need to make sure that the presidential libraries are resourced properly so they can do their jobs. Whether that's supporting exhibits, designing exhibits, serving the public who want to come to see the presidential records as they're executing their own research projects, teachers that are coming to learn about that particular president so they can then take those lessons and information back to their students. We need to make sure that we are providing the right number of resources to those presidential libraries so they can do their jobs in the communities where they're situated.
Okay. We've got a number of questions. I'm trying to figure out how to package this all as one around FOIA. There are folks who have questions about the process, timelines. I know you don't have every answer to every question and everything the archives is doing these days, but can you talk broadly about FOIA and the archives' role and maybe some of the challenges and how things are being approached now?
Right, there are challenges. I mean, there are FOIA requests for the National Archives itself. There are FOIA requests for classified records. There are FOIA requests for presidential records that are at our presidential libraries. And depending on what type of records you're looking for or how complex your request is going to affect what the wait time might be for those particular records that you're seeking. There's also the FOIA Advisory Board, which is supported by the National Archives, so, we have a very big role in FOIA. I met with a lot of open government groups I'd say about a month ago to talk to them about this process. It's ultimately something that we're going to have to look at as far as FOIA is access. So we have to look at it as an access issue. And the places in which where we are challenged with long wait times, we're going to have to figure out how we can use technology reliably to help cut the challenge of FOIA and the workload behind FOIA. There are real worries and concerns about that. You don't want to release documents that might have someone's social security numbers or their personal information, their address, things like that. That is not something that the National Archives wants to do as someone engaged in the FOIA process. So we have to figure out ways in which we can use technology to cut down the times to processing a FOIA request, but also have to be mindful that we need to realize what we're releasing when we are responsive to a FOIA request to make sure that we are respecting the privacy of others. And that's the balance. This is something that I think technology, I don't know if you could say that technology is going to solve the problem completely, but it is certainly going to make an impact on the problem. And that will be an avenue that we will be pursuing.
So you mentioned a couple times within this answer in the presidential library, so resources, staffing. This is just something you're still analyzing. Any sort of thoughts on budget and staffing and all of that as you're starting to get your handle around the agency?
Yes, it is something that I'm still learning about, that I'm still trying to understand, but it will be a major component of what I do as the Archivist of the United States. The National Archives has a huge responsibility. When you think about it, well, there's 12 and a half, 13 billion pages of records. That's really what the equivalent, 12 and a half, 13 billion pages of records. But that's just the analog collection at the National Archives. We're not even touching the digital onslaught of records that are already starting to come in the form of presidential records, but will really accelerate when you're talking about federal records. And that's going to be really an exponential increase to what the National Archives will be responsible for preserving, protecting, and sharing to the American people. And can we do that on in a more economical way using technology? Yes, but we need to build those systems to be able to process that high level of information and data and be able to meet our mission. So that will be something that I will be talking about within the executive branch. That is what I need to be doing. I will be following the processes available to me and starting to surface those challenges within the budgeting process in the executive branch. And then going forward, of course, and making that case on Capitol Hill. I've already started some of those meetings, and I will be continuing them. It's something that I take seriously. And when I was interviewing for this job with the White House, it was something I talked a lot with the White House Personnel Office and representatives about it. So I'm definitely going to keep true to what I promised, that I would, as I learned about the budget, I would surface these problems and we would try to find solutions to them.
Right. Well, and you obviously you had a flavor of it during the Senate confirmation, but you used to staff in the Senate. So it's very divided on the Hill right now. How do you feel that vote? And you've started to get to know the senators, at least as part of the process. Like how does that environment, obviously is challenging for all the agencies. How do you think it bodes for the archives, especially as we sort of say like, oh, the 250 is coming up, we're going to be front and center?
I think I feel just fine up there on the Hill. Everybody's been terrific since I've been confirmed. There's really been no issues. We've welcomed, many, many House members and senators to the National Archives. Everybody wants to come through and visit the archives, bring staff, bring family, bring close friends. I have met with every member of Congress and every senator who has come to visit the National Archives while I'm in the building, and greeted them warmly, welcomed them to the archives. We did a very successful congressional open house night that was generously hosted by the National Archives Foundation with support from AARP. And we had at least 30 members of Congress, I think, show up for that event. So I feel very good. People need, members of Congress need access to information. They need to understand the challenges facing the National Archives to be able to fulfill that mission. So it's my job to be able to educate them and explain that to them when I do meet with them.
Right. Well, I think we're getting towards the end of our time. I do have a few questions I'd love to sort of wrap up with. So I know you're a Pittsburgh sports fan. Any predictions on your baseball team this summer?
Yeah, I don't think the Pirates, it's not looking so good. They had a very, very good start at the beginning of the season, and I was very optimistic, but they have not been able to keep pace. So that's a little bit disappointing. But hope springs eternal in Pittsburgh, so we'll see. It was good that they had a nice start. So there might be the early beginnings of a resurgence of baseball in Pittsburgh, but we'll probably have to wait to following seasons to see that. But we are almost in football season, so this is really the good thing to say. I think training camp starts for the Steelers, at least the public training camp starts this week. So if you want to go to Latrobe and see the Steelers practice, I think the earliest you can go is Thursday or Friday of this week. I will be tuning in and watching and getting updates on training camp. I'm one of the few people that actually watches the preseason games. I get very excited about it. And nobody else apparently watches preseason. I like to watch preseason. So I'll be putting those dates on my calendar and get very excited about that.
Excellent. Well, I know there's a lot of football fans in the building, so you'll kindred souls with that. And I'm going to close out with a question I get almost every tour that I give of the building. It is, I think just about everybody who works the archives gets this question. It's completely unfair, but you've only been on a couple of months, so you must have an answer, of course. Do you have a favorite document yet?
Wow. Well, I was the vice chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. So the 19th Amendment is a personal favorite of mine for sure. We had extraordinary turnout when we were able to put the Emancipation Proclamation on display along with General Order Number 3 on Juneteenth weekend. And I was able to announce that we will be adding the Emancipation Proclamation to the Rotunda, hopefully before 2026, as soon as we're able to get the funds secured for proper casing for the Emancipation Proclamation. So I was really very heartened by that turnout that weekend at the National Archives. So many people took time out of their day to come and want to see those documents in person and be able to see them on display. So those are a few of the favorites for me, but some of the things that I've seen recently, I saw Lincoln's appointment of Ulysses S. Grant to be general of the Union Army, his handwritten appointment that went to Congress. And that was amazing because that had such an impact on the Civil War, that selection of Lincoln's selection of Grant. So I was really excited to see that. And then recently when I was in Chicago, I was able to see Barack Obama's handwritten inaugural address, the early draft of his first inaugural address that he wrote out by hand. And I was really blown away by being able to see that because that has not been digitized yet. It has not been released yet. And I considered myself very lucky to be able to look at that document.
Okay, well, obviously an endless trove of opportunities to find one of a kind, special, historic, put in the adjective. That's what's in the archives. We've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that I didn't ask, or we didn't get through all the questions in the Q&A, but that you would like to say to our viewers today?
No, I think we covered a lot. I just want to thank the National Archives Foundation. Thank you, Patrick, as the executive director, but also thank the board of the National Archives Foundation and everybody who's watching today, who are members or are donors to the foundation. We really do really rely upon your support for a lot of the things that we want to do at the National Archives, enhancing that experience of visiting the National Archives in Washington, D.C. We talked a little bit about ambitious plans for expanding our Civics for All of Us program and providing educational programs for teachers and kids. So I want to thank everyone who is listening today for your support. And we look forward to seeing you in the building or joining us on one of these virtual programs again soon.
Great. Well, thank you. An introductory first shot at getting to know the new archivist and Dr. Shogan. We appreciate your leadership and we welcome the new chapter in our partnership with the foundation supporting your vision for what can happen to the archives. It's an exciting time. With that, I'm going to close out a couple of things here. I have a few announcements. I want to add my thanks to our corporate supporters and our donors. If you're just joining us to watch the program and like to learn more about what we do at the National Archives Foundation, please visit our website at archivesfoundation.org. Our support helps that public outreach piece of the work that the Archivist talks about. There is the work that Congress supports and funds, and then there's the public outreach piece of it, and that's really where the foundation comes in, the things that Congress doesn't pay for. I also want to thank my foundation staff who make these programs happen, program logistics, the prep and promotional gurus, Val McVeigh, Kate Baldwin, Liana Askeles, and our guardian of the treehouse, Jim Dumas, who's always helping us get through things. Of course, we hope you'll follow us on social media at Archives FDN. You can also go to our website and sign up for our emails. We love to stay in touch with you, and you can learn more about it. And then, of course, we wouldn't have a program here if it wasn't for our shop. We run the shop for the National Archives. It is a historic experience to walk in there and find a real treasure for your home, family, friends. So don't forget us, whether it's the summertime and you're looking for something patriotic, or it's heading into the holidays. This is a real opportunity for you to connect with our history through the terrific memorabilia, clothing, and other items that we sell. National, and of course, if you can't make it to Washington, online, it's open 24/7, nationalarchivestore.org. And as always, the National Archives is our nation's memory. What is past is prologue. Until next time, on behalf of the National Archives Foundation, thank you for joining us today.